Welcome to the Informed Pregnancy and Parenting Podcast. I'm your host, pregnancy-focused chiropractor, Dr. Elliot Berlin. My guests today are two filmmakers and parents here to tell us about their documentary film, The Face of Birth, including how their own parenting experiences inspired their work and what it was like to collaborate and create a film about home birth in Australia. Kate, Gorman, and Gavin Banks, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
I love your film. It's currently streaming on Informed Pregnancy Plus, and I love that as well. Thank you for sharing your baby with us.
It's great to have a new home.
And it's a powerful film. And what I learned as our podcast goes more and more international with guests is that some of the things that one would have thought are just local to different cities or states in America or the country as a whole are actually somewhat universal around the world, at least in modernized countries. So it was interesting to see the Australian peek at some of the same things that we struggle here. Before we get into the content of the film and the making of the film, I would love to get a little bit of a background of each of you. Let's start with you, Kate. Where are you from originally, and what do you do?
I was born in Sydney, Australia, but I have lived in Melbourne most of my life with some joints. I've been living overseas and living back in Sydney. I started in the industry as an actor and I retrained as a director in my early 30s, and I continue to do both, act and direct.
But what do you prefer?
Whatever I'm not doing at the time.
Okay, so sit-down comedy.
When I go into acting after having directed for a bit, I go, oh man, this is so easy. I only have to think about one thing. Are you kidding me? But if I'm acting, I miss the control and I'm terrible. I'm sitting on set going, they could have just moved the camera there, or they could have, and I'm just like, stop it. It's not your job. So yeah.
That must be hard to turn around. I don't know if you recognize me, but I'm a famous actor here in the United States. I have a show on Showtime with Emma Stone in which she appears in all 10 episodes and I appear in 10% of the episodes for about 10 seconds. It's like 4 minutes. But doing that one spot, I did get a pretty good, interesting look at the production of television. And it's quite interesting to see all the different roles that people play. And I can see how, it's a totally different part of your brain to do acting versus directing. And also, as a director, you seemingly have so much more control over, which way this thing goes versus being directed. And was all of this in play when you made this film?
Yes.
And what about the other side of your life, the motherhood, parenting bit? What was that journey like for you?
So really amazing and life-changing. Actually, I am also in The Face of Birth as one of the subjects. So I do cover this a little bit in the film. But with my first pregnancy, my daughter Olivia, who's now 21, I was going down what is a sort of traditional route for Australian women, which is you have an obstetrician as your lead carer. And I just did that because that's what my friends did. And I honestly thought that was going to give me more choice. And then during the journey of my pregnancy, I worked out that we wanted really different things. And I worked out that having an obstetrician doesn't give you more choice. It actually gives you less choice, and it funnels you into a narrow model, which can often lead down the cascade of intervention. And it wasn't that I didn't have an issue with hospitals particularly, but I wanted the freedom to be able to birth in any position I wanted to birth in. I really wanted to have a natural third stage, and I didn't want to be told to hurry up. I wanted to just be able to work with my body, and these things weren't possible in the hospital system with their protocols. It was a private hospital. We have public and private hospitals in Australia. And I think actually the public hospitals perhaps are better than the private hospitals. But again, I thought, if I was paying for it, to have a private obstetrician, that it would be better. And I totally flipped everything at 36 weeks pregnant. I walked out of that obstetrician's office and I was like, this woman is nuts. She's not listening to me. I had nowhere to have my baby, but I'd been doing so much research, and I had done a birthing class with this wonderful woman called Lena Clerk, who just opened my mind to all these different possibilities. And through that, I found some contacts, and I found a birthing centre. It doesn't exist anymore, but a standalone birth centre, which was a little cottage, it was a little house. to be able to be run. It did have an obstetrician there that ran it, but he didn't birth the babies. The midwives birthed the babies, but you definitely have some appointments with him, but it was midwifery-led care. And I had midwives deliver my baby, and I got to birth in water. That was another thing I wanted that wasn't possible in the hospital. And it was fantastic and amazing. And I really had the birth I wanted, and I recovered so well. I mothered so well. I breastfed so well. I felt like a warrior. And then for my next child, I was giving birth in the UK, not in London, rurally in the Midlands, in a little village, or it was a hamlet really. And they're completely set up for those choices. So I just went to the doctor, confirmed a pregnancy, and then I went to the next room where the midwife was, and there was 3 midwives. I had a relationship with all 3 of them. I didn't know which one of those 3 was going to be on call for my birth, but at least with only 3, of course you have a favorite, but you get to develop a relationship with all of them. And I had a water birth at home with my second child, which was again amazing and fantastic and joyous and just beautiful. And then for my third child, I was back in Australia, and knowing that I wasn't going to a hospital or a birth centre this time, I wanted a midwife. So my only option was a private midwife. There are now some options in Australia to do on a public health system to have a midwife-led care and do a home birth, but it wasn't available to me where I lived at that time. So I was employing a private midwife, and it was just as things were about to shake up and possibly become illegal to have a home birth, which is not what people think. It was all about insurance, not about safety. It was about the midwife. You couldn't employ a midwife at home because the midwife could not get insurance to deliver you at home. And
Oh,
if
wow.
they did deliver your baby at home, I would be inciting them to do something illegal. But I did it anyway because the law hadn't quite come in. I was just like, during my pregnancy, I was like, no, this isn't right. And I had 2 daughters by then. And I was like, well, what happens to their choice? I was very informed and armed with all this information about how home birth for me as a low-risk pregnancy was a safe choice and an empowering choice. And I was getting really good care from these really good midwives. And that choice was about to be taken away from women. And being a filmmaker and a storyteller, I was like, no, we've got to do something about this. And so I started to make the film while I was pregnant with my third child, found Gavin, and the film took 3 years to make. Yeah, that was so my own personal birthing journey was the start of making this film to help empower, inform women and give women choice.
That's a powerful journey. Your personal journey is super powerful. And on that first one, you just caught it in the nick of time, it sounds like.
Oh, yeah. Well, no, our
Walking.
film helped change government policy here in Australia. It's one of the things we're most proud of. We had a screening in Government House. It'd be like having a screening in the White House.
Mm. I want to get into all of that, like the
Yeah.
whole journey of the film and the impact, but you could see the passion behind it, where it came from. Your personal journey and your first pregnancy, I meant just finding the midwifery option at the very end, just in the nick of time there. And then I guess the contrast in the UK, where it's not just
Mm.
legal, but super common. And then going back and almost losing the option and seeing that other people will lose it entirely.
Sorry, I'll just say one thing about the UK option, and free,
Oh, yeah.
right? So that to have a baby in the National Health Service is free,
Yeah,
and you get what you want to do.
that's profound. I mean, here there's a lot of people who want to have midwifery care right here in Los Angeles or out of hospital birth or home birth, and they can't because their insurance won't cover it and it's cost prohibitive. So they end up going, instead of having the baby at home with a provider, they go have the baby at an advanced medical facility with many providers, which is obviously a bigger strain on the overall health system here. But it's just not free. It's a parallel opposite. All right, so you mentioned you got together with Gavin. You found Gavin to make this film. Gavin, what is your background? And eventually, how did you find each other?
Yeah, thanks, Elliot. I grew up a missionary kid, an urban missionary kid. And so from a really early age, it was instilled in me the importance of doing the right by others. And I guess that was the beginning of building a sense of a crusader in me, somebody who wanted to save the world. I'm a bit older now and a bit more tempered. But that spirit is alive and well. I sort of, after my missionary stint, I went to uni and I studied communication and became a filmmaker. I have two kids. They were both born in hospital in Newcastle, New South Wales. My kids are now grown up and leading lives of their own. The births that we had were, we thought were good, but my wife was somewhat traumatized by them. And it wasn't until years later that I came across a project, an independent midwife, while midwives in Australia still had insurance, wanted to make a film about a birthing stool that she had created for use to help facilitate natural birth. And this birthing stool had been taken up in the local hospital near where I live, and over 15,000 kids had been born on that birthing stool. So it was broadly accepted and used, and she made a film about how to use it. But instead of being an instruction manual, the film became an hour-long expose on her philosophy of birth, which was natural physiological childbirth is something that every woman can do with the right kind of support. And what I learned in that film, through the course of making that film with her, was that a lot of wrongs were perpetrated against women because of misinformation, because of fear, because of, shall I say, ignorance. And I determined that as a filmmaker, as a storyteller myself, I had an obligation to try and do something about that, particularly given that it was a lot of white educated men that were advising women or encouraging women down the path of, say, for example, cesarean section. So I set about trying to make a film, and probably about 7 years into that journey, after doing some filming and trying to raise money to do it, I met Kate through a mutual friend. And this mutual friend said, "You two are trying to do the same thing. Why don't you meet?" And the rest is history. So we got together, we started shooting, we started a Facebook page, did an initial shoot, cut a little teaser together. And what we set out to do, although the subject of the film is looking at home birth, we didn't set out to make a film that told women, you should have a home birth. We used home birth as a vehicle to explore what birth is and the importance of choice and the importance of women being empowered and informed. And that just blew everything open and was really very, very exciting to see where that took us.
How's the film, the finished product, compared to the film you started to make?
The film I was going to make was called The Politics of Birth. I think it was going to be more essay style. What I love about The Face of Birth is we looked at the typical stereotype of what people thought a home birthing mother would be and look like, and we turned that on its head. We went out and interviewed a bunch of powerful, informed, intelligent, educated women, and these women that were smart and attractive and successful and informed were saying, "Hey, I did the research and it doesn't add up. What everybody's doing and what we should be doing are really two different things." So I like the path that it took. I like what Kate brought to the film. I love that her experience and her personal journey is a really key part of the film, because this is about something, it's about the most intimate, aside from, for example, making love with our partners. This is the most intimate thing that we'll do in life, is to have a child, to birth a baby.
Absolutely. And the way you were just talking about changing the vision of who does home birth, there was a quote in the film from Noni Hazelhurst, and she said, "I think there is a perception that only strong women have home births, which I find extraordinary because I think all women are strong." And that just like, boom, nailed it. Like, I spent many years as a doula also. How I got into birth work is a whole another story, but for people who wanted that, who it was helpful for, an extension of the body work essentially that I do during pregnancy, they would ask for that kind of body work during labor, and the privilege to be a little tiny fly in the wall watching as people birth their children in just so many different settings and scenarios and experiences. The one thing that just ties them all women are strong and powerful. And, sometimes it's really just helping them see that and helping
Yeah.
them find that power.
That comment brings tears to my eyes. My mother is strong, my sister is strong, my wife is strong, my daughter is strong. And probably the thing that kept me going before I found Kate in wanting to make the film was hearing the story of a mother who had birthed 6 children. She had been raped at knife point at the age of 15. And before she gave birth to her first baby, somebody said, well, you need an obstetrician. And she said, there is no way I am letting a man with a knife anywhere near me. She was introduced to midwifery-led care, continuity of care, and through the experience of birthing her first baby, was healed of that hideous experience that she had had at the age of 15. And so I think seeing, for me as a man, seeing that some women came out of childbirth stepping into their power and their wonder and their brilliance, and other women came out of childbirth with the symptoms of people that have gone to war. How could that happen? How could that be so different? And I wanted to be able to do something that could support people to find a way to be empowered and to step into their brilliance. And I think too, through the work with Monica Bonig from the Birthright Experience, the Birthright Chair, her big thing was pregnancy is a period of time to get used to the thought of becoming parents. It's the time where it's not, get everything done before the baby comes. It's a time to start to take responsibility and to think about my life as a parent and our life as parents moving forward. And so rather than taking a position of, I don't know anything, I'm just going to leave the decisions to everybody else, it's actually a time to consciously start to make the shift. And it's a perfect time to prepare so that when I am a parent, I have learned a whole bunch of stuff and I'm ready. Well, as ready as we can be, but I've consciously prepared. So the journey of a midwifery-led care, continuity of care model of preparing women and family couples to become families, I think is a really integral part of being able to have a good birth and being able to be confident moving forward, raising kids.
Also, an amazing point. My wife was a perinatal psychologist. Talks about how sometimes people plan for 9 months for the, let's say, 24 hours that is birth, and no time at all for the next 24 years that is what you do with the child in your home. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, I want to kind of get into the meat of the film. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We are talking to Kate Gorman and Gavin Banks, and we're talking about the documentary film, The Face of Birth. Okay, so 3 years to make the film. It's 9 months to make a baby. When I made my films, I felt like they also took a long time, what felt like a long time to me, years. And they also felt a little bit like there were parallels in terms of having a baby. Are you happy with how the baby came out? How has the baby been received?
Yes, no, I'm very happy with how the baby came out. It took a long time because we were also following some people or some events that we just had to wait for. We shot really so much footage, just so much footage. In fact, we ended up making 2 other films out of things we shot at the same time. And when the film initially came out, we had screenings all over the country in Australia. They were incredibly well attended. We had really built our audience on Facebook that were following us before the film came out. We had pre-sold it, coupled with a movement, a call to action to try and help this issue of women having choice of practitioner in place of birth. And then I was so overwhelmed at the time of how it was received and that it was making a change both on personal level for pregnant women who were watching it, and then also on a government level, because we gave the film over to lobbyists and said, do with it what you will. And one extraordinary woman, Justine, organised a screening in Parliament House and got all the pollies to come and watch. Pollies, would you use that term? You call your politicians
Politicians?
Yeah, to come and watch the film, and they used it to create a groundswell and put pressure. But I'll just tell a personal story about it. Was actually quite some years later, maybe 4 years after the film came out, And I have been on this very popular high rating television series in Australia for a long time. I was in it a long time ago. And then in the last 5 years, they've brought my character back, not full time, but just part time. So during this time when this event happened, I was on air, and the character I play on this television show isn't very nice. So I get recognized sometimes in that I know you, I don't know why, but I know I don't like you kind of way. So they'll come up to me and then I'll smile, say something, and then they go, oh, hang on. You're on that show. So there was this couple, and it was in a lovely botanical gardens. And there was this couple walking up to me, a younger couple. I would have said they were in their, late 20s. And you can just tell when people recognize you from something. And they're walking towards me, and I just sort of took a big breath, ready to talk about this television show that I'm on. And they went, you made The Face of Birth. You were in The Face of Birth. And I just
Oh,
went,
wow.
yes.
Oh,
And they just said that completely changed our decision making. And we ended up getting a midwife, and we had midwifery led care. We had a home birth. And I was just crying. It was just the best moment, because they were thanking me for changing their journey and giving them an empowering birth experience. And that's just like the best thing. And unlike before that, because Gavin and I went to lots of screenings, we organised Q&A with a lot of the experts that were in our films, would often come to the screenings and speak afterwards. We had a lot of straight after the film reaction, but this was different. This was someone I didn't know who had bought it without my knowing, who then came up to me, so like obviously sometime later, like they'd had their baby already by then. So I don't know, maybe it was 2 years before they'd seen it, remembered me and wanted to come up and thank me. So that with this film still happens. We will still get emails or comments on our website. In a way, it's fantastic that the film has such a life, because there are always women who are birthing babies who are looking for information, and it's wonderful. But on the other hand, it's a bit sad that these things are still an issue and the film is needed. Do you know what I mean? I feel really good about those encounters, but I am also aware that the film is still needed because there is lack of information, lack of choice, and a culture of fear.
I produced 2 films, one about breech birth, one about vaginal birth after cesarean. And after the VBAC film came out, we had a bunch of screenings and a lot of positive reaction and action in response to the film. But then it was almost like a match strike. It lit big, and then before we knew it, it was sort of like embers. And the feedback I was getting then was, wow, I saw your film about VBAC and it was very powerful and moving. I just wish I saw it before I had my baby. And that was crushing to me, because I was like, I made it so you could see it before you had your baby. So you can get the information and you can get the empowerment to explore your options and pick an option and find support for your options. And they were seeing it afterwards when it was too late. So that's really where Informed Pregnancy Plus came from. Like, I just didn't have like a great avenue for people to go as a go-to place to say, where can I find information and easily access it and affordably access it. And that's really where the whole idea of putting together a platform for this type of content came from. But the opposite side of that coin is when someone says, it was your film that helped me realize that once a cesarean doesn't mean I always have to have a C-section, and that I could explore choices, and maybe I am a good candidate. And so I almost got a little teary when you said that first recognition about the film and how you've influenced like a total change in their life and their child's life and probably their future generations.
Yeah, exactly.
I wonder about the polys. I'm learning my terminology, because you said it earlier, Gavin Uni, and I'm like, I don't really say that either, but I know what you meant. Were you at the screening with the polys? Was there a Q&A afterwards? How was their reception?
Yes and yes. And, they smile and nod and say, yes, of course.
Oh, that.
I think the challenging thing there, and we have one of Justine Keynes who passed away a number of years ago. She was a massive advocate and worked as part of the maternity coalition in Australia for years, was an incredible consumer advocate, and probably may have done more for childbirth in Australia than anybody to date, like a remarkable woman. She made a comment in an interview where she said, I have been sitting in a politician's office where he has said, yes, Justine, I know that what you are advocating is going to save the country money on our health bill. It's better for women. But he said, there is no way that I am going to stand up against Dr. Feelgood in his white coat on national television on the news when a baby has died and try and defend a decision to do something other than what the medical lobby is arguing for. And I think that's one of the big challenges in Australia. We have a body called the AMA, the Australian Medical Association, and that is a union for doctors that promotes the rights of doctors. And I think that sometimes we forget that it is a union and it's there to protect the rights of doctors. It's not necessarily a
It's not the
body
World
that
Health
is
Organization.
advocating best interests of women. And I think that's one of the things that we made really clear in the film. We wanted to make clear in the film is that a lot of systems in medicine are put in place to service themselves and to benefit themselves. You know, like the sense of putting all the sick people in the same place to get better. It makes sense in terms of services and streamlining services and efficiencies for the services. But what we don't know about hospital is, I'm pretty sure the statistics in Australia is that 1 in 3 people who die in hospital die of something unrelated to what they presented with. So cross-infection. Those are not the stories that we hear. What we hear about is the story when somebody tries to have a home birth and something goes wrong and then a baby dies. We don't hear about the babies that die in hospital. We don't
Yeah.
hear about deaths in hospital that are unrelated to the causes for which they presented. So we have a very biased system that protects itself. And we wanted to make a film that actually advocated the position of women.
And also further on that, something that Hannah Darlin, who's amazing in our film, talks about is we're also, the yardstick we're measuring that safety by is an alive mother and an alive baby, not a healthy mother, and healthy being mental health as well. So when often with the cascade of intervention in hospital or the, I understand hospitals have pressure on them and are stressed and people are overworked, but within that, mothers are falling through the gaps and being discharged from hospital with an alive baby and then with postnatal depression or an infection from suturing that hasn't been picked up or blood clotting, or do you know what I mean? Like the statistics they talk about is an alive mother and a live baby. There's more to health and safety and a good outcome in birth than that.
Right. So I sometimes hear people say to someone who had, let's say, a cascade of interventions that wasn't necessary, it didn't have to go there, and it led to a cesarean birth with a healthy mom and a healthy baby. And she's sad about it. She didn't want that experience. And people will say to her, I think, trying to calm her down, all that matters is that you have a healthy baby, is what they say. Which I know is not true, because if we had chopped off her torso and pulled out the baby, nobody would say all that matters is that we have a healthy baby. Everybody's goal is a healthy mother and a healthy baby. Everybody's goal is that. But over intervention is not necessarily the best way to get to that goal.
Yeah, Hannah in our film also talks about the difference between a mother birth framework and a childbirth framework. So a mother birth framework is that if I am happy and healthy and my needs are met, I will mother better. And a childbirth framework, as long as my child is okay, then that's okay. And society totally sits in the latter.
Yes, spot on.
So you can be demonized if you, as a mother, are making choices that is going up against the recommendations from the medical profession to have an alive baby.
Mm-hmm.
And then everybody is moving towards possible intervention and poor outcomes. Do you know what I mean? Like if we're not putting the mother in the center of the care, and then the mother is doing what she wants to do because she wants to mother better for her baby. And yes, an alive mother and baby is the most important thing, but it is not the only thing. And we seem to sweep away everything else and not consider what is possible or what mothers may want with this, oh yes, but your baby could be at risk. And there was someone else said in the film, if we were all doing best practice, everything would be the same everywhere. So that's just not true. Do you know what I mean? We're not doing best practice everywhere. Everything's skewed to what that institution's needs may be, either as an individual or as a system.
Yeah. I also think as some of the new technology comes out, there's an eagerness to apply it. and people who spend their whole lives studying it and put their faith entirely into it truly believe that it's the best and only way to go.
Absolutely. Michelle
Uh,
O'Donnell said that. He said, we're obsessed with technological advances and not listening to scientific advances.
right.
Yeah, one of my favorite comments from a movie, and just bear with me here, is Jeff Goldblum in Jurassic Park. And Richard Attenborough's character has just said, "We can make dinosaurs." And Goldblum retorts, he says, I've got a real problem with this. He said, "You are so excited that you didn't think about whether you should."
Mm.
And I think as humans, it's really easy to get excited about this new thing. And we can apply this to anything in our lives. Wow, I've got this new thing and it changes how I do something. But what is the bigger picture? What is the cost of that? Because every new thing has a benefit and then every new thing has a cost. And what we know about intervention, about stopping the natural process of childbirth, is that it impacts what physiologically happens in the mother, what physiologically happens in the baby. You know, for example, with vaginal childbirth, if you can delay the cord clamping, the mother and baby can get the biggest hit of oxytocin that they will ever get in their lives. And it's the thing that bonds mother and child. But what we do is we rush in to clamp the cord because we're worried about the mother bleeding and getting the placenta out. So a procedure to try and avoid danger robs us of potentially one of the most significant things that can help mother and child to bond. And I think when we look at physiological childbirth, there are all these different things that are beneficial. It's like breast milk for the baby versus formula. You know, people used to think that when the colostrum came out of the woman's breast, it was just this watery stuff that had no value. But further scientific research shows us it's full of all these amazing antibodies, all this great, great stuff. So I think too often in the West, particularly, we step in and intervene without understanding the full consequences. And we might win the battle, but I think we do so risking losing the war, so to speak. And the people that get lost in that is the confidence of the mother, the mental health of the mother, is her ability to be able to be confident in making choices around her health, and being able to be confident in trusting her intuition, which is a crucial tool in parenting. You know, I could go on about this for hours, but
Yeah, I think, inherently most of the interventions and modernizations and technological advancements in childbirth are inherently good and helpful and quite life-saving and even health improving when used at the right time in the right place, generally sparingly. And I think it's the overuse and the overintervention and the pushing on somebody who doesn't want it and doesn't need it is where we start to do more harm than good.
absolutely.
Let's take another break. I have more questions about the response to the film and then also advice. Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're talking to Kate Gorman and Gavin Banks. The film is The Face of Birth. Okay, so who did you piss off? And what was the pushback?
I remember we had a screening at a uni in Melbourne, and we did a different kind of screening model where different people organised the screening. So some of our screenings were in cinemas, some of our screenings were in universities, some of our screenings were in hospitals. So this particular one was a university attached to a hospital, and almost all of them were organised by midwives, and midwives are very organised people. I'll tell you, they're fantastic people to organise screenings because they're all over it. And I got this frantic, upset phone call from somebody at the hospital saying, "You can't screen the film here." And luckily, I wasn't the organizer. So I was like, "Oh, I'm sorry you feel that way." And they said, "Yes, we've got hundreds of people coming and I can't just sanction this film. What is this film?" And I said, "Well, I'm happy to send it to you first and you can watch it." I said something like, "Might generate more interest if you already have hundreds of people coming." I just said something a little bit like that. And she sort of went, And then she watched the film and then she rang me back like she was being so gracious. She said, all right, well, I will allow this screening. Again, I'm not the organizer. So I'm like, yeah, whatever. No skin off my nose. And she said, but I just don't see why you had to pick one of your subjects. So she means one of the mothers that we followed on their journey. It had to be a GP. This is so interesting, right? So one of our mothers was a VBAC GP. So she's a medical doctor who had a cesarean on her first birth, and the story she tells, it would have been a public hospital, so the obstetrician on call, who she would never met before, said there was fetal distress, said she needed a cesarean. She agreed. She looked at the fetal monitor out afterwards the next day. She's a doctor, and there was no fetal distress.
Whoa.
And she had a home birth with a private midwife because that was her only option to VBAC, and she absolutely believed that going into labour spontaneously was her best option after a cesarean, so to VBAC. And in hospital, a doctor had said to her, oh, we could give you a bit of an oxy to get you going. And she knew that that was a bad thing to do. Anyway, she VBAC'd her second baby and her third baby, and it was all great. So I just find it so interesting that what upset the medical profession is that we had put a doctor in our film who was criticising the medical profession and had chosen to VBAC.
Right. Because they would like it to seem like only tree-hugging, Prius-driving vegan hippies would consider that.
Yeah.
But that's one of the things I love about the films on the other side of the coin. You know, and I was surprised, actually. I come from a very medical background. I used to work in emergency rooms and ambulances. I was medic. And, you know, when I heard the word doula for the first time, I was like, what does that mean? And midwifery, and then the difference between a doula and a midwife and home birth. And I did. I thought those are the only people who give birth at home. You know, it's a very stereotypical type of person. And then I got into the world of birth, and you see it's very diverse. Lawyers, doctors, you know.
And you know how you were quoting the lovely Naomi Hazelhurst before with all women are strong? The other thing she said, that giving birth's a great leveler. Doesn't matter if she says a woman in Toorak, but like, you know, she's meaning like a woman in Beverly Hills, or you're a woman in a field. You're a woman giving birth. At that moment, we're all probably naked. We're doing something instinctual and primal, and that is something that joins us all together at that moment. Yeah, wherever you are in the world. And one of my favourite parts to film of the film was when Gavin and I went to the Red Centre, to Utopia, and also to Yirrkala in Almond Land, and interviewed Indigenous women and those Indigenous midwives in our film who were just so extraordinary. And sitting with those two elders who are so powerful, and them telling me how they have never had a breech birth because that would just be really inconvenient, quite frankly, in the middle of the desert to have a breech birth. So they just don't do it. They have all this ritual and technique and skill to have that not happen. I love that. So you've got that side, as well as our GP who have made the same choice.
That is the big leveler.
Yeah. Yeah.
Gavin, what's your input here? What was the pushback?
Yeah, I wasn't that aware of a lot of pushback.
We had a phone call go from the head of Ranscog who was really, really cranky.
Yeah, look, the head of the obstetricians and gynecologists union, he wasn't that happy, but kind of brushed that off a little bit. You know, their angle is always, well, we've got to keep women and babies safe. And we've already talked about, well, that should be a minimum. That shouldn't be the standard. That should be the basis of the standard. We should be looking at emotional, spiritual, and mental health as well as physical health. I mean, that's a given. I think, you know, for me, it was just overwhelmingly positive. We had universities that took on the films as recommended reading for midwifery students. That was incredibly exciting.
Wow.
Yeah, it's become part of the curriculum in one of our universities.
Yeah, so the fact that the students would have to watch the film as part of their reading and their learning was really exciting for us. A year after releasing the film, we released it internationally with subtitles in 12 languages. And the transcriptions and the subtitles came from people out in the community that was so excited. And they said, if we did the subtitles, could you release it in our country? You know, could your DVD be available to us? And so we did that.
That's amazing too.
It was incredible. French and German and Spanish, and
translations were done for free, mostly by midwives.
Yeah, we had that with Heads Up, our breech film. people reached out same way. And I was just like, oh, of course. Great.
And we got,
Oh,
there was
sorry.
lots of emails and correspondence. And I think just to go back to Kate's experience, I'm not somebody that has spent time in front of the camera. My early work life was shooting and editing videos. So now I'm a director producer. But I was out shooting another documentary and this woman just looked at me like she knew me. And she said, I know you. And we were talking about the circles we moved in. And she said, you made the face of birth. And I've never experienced like fame for Kate. Kate was in Neighbours and was a massive star in the UK when she was younger. I haven't had that kind of public acknowledgement, but there was almost like a hero worship. And, for me, we were just doing what we did. We made a film that we felt was necessary. And the excitement for me is in that we have made real and lasting change. More importantly, we've been able to inspire women and couples to believe in themselves and trust their intuition and trust themselves to get the support they need to do what they need to have a safe birth. And that's an amazing platform from which to start to parent.
You put so much work and effort and time and resource into making the film. And when you see it having the impact that you set out to have, it's got to be extremely gratifying. And in your case, aside from the individual stories of the people who you're empowering, having had an impact on your entire country and saving midwifery is, I mean, on camera or off, both of you should be wearing tights and a cape. And, you're superheroes to me. I guess my sort of closing thoughts, and I'll definitely after that open up if there's anything you want to add that we didn't discuss, but advice. What would your advice be to someone who's, on a pregnancy journey, maybe the first, maybe a subsequent, and, starts to realize maybe I don't have all the information. Maybe I don't just always do whatever they tell me to do, but I ask questions. On one side of the coin, what kind of advice would you give to them? And on the other side, advocates, other people who want to follow in your footsteps and, continue to advocate and help inform and empower. Any recommendations for them?
Yes, you really brought back all these memories, Elliot, when you were saying about the person who saw your VBAC film and said, I wish I'd seen it before I'd had my baby. And I remember this is something that Gavin and I were talking about so much while we were making the film. And then when the film came out, and we did do a little bit of filming with this group called Core of Life that are an educational group. So I think, yes, I think that before you're thinking of having children, I'm just going to talk about women for a sec here, not men. It could be flipping through the paper. There could be a huge article about intervention rates or anything to do, and you just won't read it. You'll just turn that page, right? And then when you are pregnant or thinking of getting pregnant, then a lot of women, not all, will become quite investigative. And it's then, hopefully, when they will seek you out, do a quick Google. And I think it's better now than it ever has been, where you can find information. But I feel we really need to plant the seed with girls, like teenage girls, that they can be empowered to make a choice and that they should be informed about pregnancy. And I think that's an education thing, because how they are getting educated is by the media. And our media has a complete culture of fear around birth, both in, the drama and comedy we consume, if you look how birth is portrayed, and also in the reporting, which circles back quickly to one of the pushbacks we had. It's not a big one, but it's important and it pisses me off, is in our publicity when the film was coming out, we were on our top kind of panel show at the time, top rating panel show, and they did a whole segment on it, which wasn't particularly biased one way or the other, but you know how then they will discuss it and sum up. And then all of them at the end were summing up and going, oh, yes, but it's not for me. Or if I'd done that, I would have died, blah, blah, blah. So in the end, them having the last word on what you just said, all your years of work and research and statistics and experts is summed up by one person dismissing it who isn't an expert. So that's part of the problem in the media as well. Like, how do we get people to talk about it positively? And Noni, who's very famous, who you've mentioned a couple of times, also she didn't in the end, but she was going to go on this show in Australia called Q&A, which is quite brutal. Like, its point is to tear things apart. And in the end, she said, I just don't want to do that. And we were like, well, fair enough. She passionately is a home birther, but she doesn't have to go on that show and be, teared down to try and get the positive out there. So it is really difficult. So I think in two parts, we need education for girls just to plant the seed of the possibility and to take away the fear around birth so that they can confidently look at other options and make a choice. There's a feminist issue in it, our right to choose, and that putting women in the centre of the care is important. And then how do we get your platform? How do we get our films seen by women before they have their babies? We did a lot when our first film first came out to try and advertise that. And we did it in a lot of mainstream places and it didn't work very well, to be honest. But it's like the people who needed it seem to have found it. And I would love to get it out to more people than that. But my advice would be if you are thinking of having a baby, even if it's something, if you know you want a baby at some point, even if you're not thinking about it now, start doing all your reading and your research in a casual way now. So that when you've only got that 9-month period, you don't have to do what I did and at 36 weeks spin on a dime and
seriously. Yeah. I would say even, on a larger scale, if you're thinking about having a baby, if you know somebody who's thinking about a baby, if you care about somebody who is thinking about having a baby or is pregnant or recently had a baby, the more empowered the masses are, the more it'll trickle down to the people who need it and, get the information while they can still act
share
on it.
your positive stories. So that is
Oh,
something.
yes.
Even now, if I see someone pregnant, I'll go, I had the best births. And sometimes that's a great opener and they'll go, what? Because women will
They've
share
never heard that story.
their pain. Do you know what I mean? Oh, it was the worst thing I've ever done, blah, 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 blah. No, not worst thing I've ever done, but like, oh, it hurt like hell, whatever. And I say, oh my God, I had the best birthing experiences. And that will make them go, what do you mean? And then I'll just gently go, yeah, it was so great. And then if I feel they're a bit open to it and I'm not intruding too much, I'll mention that I'll say, I'm actually really informed on this subject. And I'll say, not just because I've had 3 children, I've made a whole documentary about it. And then I'll say, which is, a little bit like my PhD thesis, really, this film, like that's how much research went into it.
Wow, yes.
And I'll say, because I'll say, I could give it to you if you like. And then I've done this quite a few times and I know that every person I've given it to gave it away to someone else.
That's important.
Yeah.
That's important.
I think for me, giving birth to a child, it's a real beginning of adulthood. And I think if we don't prepare for that, if we leave choices to other people and we trust the judgment of those around us to give us what is best, I think we're heading for a train wreck. I think it's a roll of the dice on whether we have a good experience or we don't. And what I would say, and I don't want to make people scared about birth, birth can be the most beautiful, wondrous, amazing thing, but it doesn't just happen like that. You have to plan for it. You have to put things into place so that it can be safe. And there are things you can do. The research has been out there for 50 years on how to do this and do this well so that women are empowered and supported, no matter whether they have a home birth or end up needing to go to the hospital for a cesarean. You can have a great birth no matter how that baby comes out of you if you have the right support. And so my challenge to you and to anybody thinking about baby, all those things that you said, Elliot, if you know someone, is do the research. The film is a great place. This platform you have created is a great place for sound information for people who are telling stories who don't have a vested interest. Because if you go to hospital, and if, like in Australia, we go to hospital and we do antenatal sessions in preparation, and the take-home message was, if you don't have your baby in the hospital, something terrible could happen and it might die. And it's just not true.
Right. I always sort of poke fun at what to expect when you're expecting, because pretty much every chapter ends the same way. And this could go downhill very quickly, and either you or the baby will die. So call your doctor and ask for more information. And at the end of the day, not that there's no valuable information in there, but it's such a scary anthology to read that the best use I could find for it is when my kid is just a little too low in the chair to be at a good height for the table. It's so thick. Putting it underneath them is really elevates them to just the right height. Anyway, all the things you're saying is a brilliant point. The idea is not you must have a home birth. The idea is look at the options and choose what resonates with you. And wherever you're going to go, prepare yourself for that scenario so that you have a good experience. Absolutely. If somebody wants to have a hospital birth, that's where they should have the baby. That's where they feel safe and confident and comfortable. If they want to have a cesarean birth, that's your choice. But make informed choices so that you're making empowered choices, and then find support for those choices. Don't do it based on fear either. Dr. Stuart Fishburne used to say all the time, if a person had never flown in an airplane, now they're 32 years old, going to fly in an airplane for the first time, but all they know about air travel is what they see in TV, movies, and newspaper headlines, they'd be terrified to get into that airplane because the assumption is that it's either going to have engine failure and fall out of the sky or be hijacked by terrorists or have snakes on it. The idea that a plane just takes off and flies and you have a good flight and nice snacks and land smoothly is foreign, even though that's what happens almost every single time. And childbirth somehow is the same way. If you rely on, as you said, newspaper headlines, news reports, media reports, they're never going to really bring you these wonderful feel-good stories, which are most of the stories. You don't see a headline, plane took off and had a great sell. But luckily, there are passionate people like you who saw the need and put in the effort and made a powerful film. And we're lucky to all be the recipients of the face of birth. Before we sign off, anything I left out here, a point that you wanted to make or that you wanted to share?
No, maybe just and continuity of care as well, if that's possible. So all the things you just said, but also if you can somehow have continuity of care.
How do you mean? Expand on that.
So whoever your carer is, let's just say it's a midwife, because that would be my preference, that midwife is with you during your pregnancy and then is there in your birth, because that's the person that knows you. I think issues can happen when you're walking into a situation like a hospital and no one knows you. So there's this assumption that you're not going to be able to do it. Or if you say, I don't want oxytocin. Oh, I don't want, not oxytocin, I'm sorry.
Epidural or Pitocin?
Epidural, yeah. And unfortunately, because women aren't listened to, and also you're in labor, so you've got to be in that sacred space doing your thing, having a baby. You might need someone to advocate for you. And if you can have continuity of care with your doula or your midwife or your GP or your doctor, whoever it is, but they know what they want, they know you, and they know your pregnancy, they know what your issues are, but more importantly, they know what your issues aren't.
Mm.
So if you have a whole people looking for what's going wrong, you've got somebody who goes, oh, no, Kate's really strong. Kate knows her body. Kate's birthed beautifully twice before, whatever it is. That information is just as important.
I agree, Kate. It's who can I have that can support me so that when I'm incapacitated, I have an advocate. I have someone I can trust. I have someone who loves me and will be protective of me. That's the person I want in the room. Sometimes the male partner is not the best person to be there. That was one of the things that our research uncovered, is intervention rates went up when men went into the room with women because the man went, I don't want my woman going through that. Stop the pain. I can't cope with her being in pain. Women around, what studies showed was the experienced women supporting the new mother. They knew this is normal. Rhea Dempsey, who's in the film, talks about ringing the circle. The mother is in the middle of birth. She doesn't know if she can get through this and can cope with the pain. And she looks from one to the next of all the people that are in the room. It could be a midwife. It could be maybe her mother or her sister. And she's looking to the person who's going to say, no, make it stop. Give me the drug. And she looks to her husband and he goes, how can I make it stop? And he says, this is too much. We've got to stop this. And at the end of the story, the woman goes, why didn't you believe in me? I could have done that. So Rhea said women are looking for an out, but they might not actually want that. And what we need to do is support them to understand how powerful they are and how magnificent. Indigenous elders, she makes a comment in the film. She says, we are holy women when we give birth.
That is my line when John
Yeah.
Yeah. We are holy when we give birth. And I'm tearing up now. You can't see that because this is just a voice recording. But women out there, you are remarkable and you have it within you to do this and have an amazing experience. The only way that's going to happen is if you have people around you that can support you to hold the space and protect the space and protect your wants and your interests. against what the system's going to want to do. And if you can do that, you'll have a great birth.
I think it's an incredible message to end on. You're both great storytellers, and I can hear the passion coming directly from your hearts. Where can we find your work online?
So faceofbirth.com. You can find there, and there's all those little extra tidbits and things like that. So that's all about Face of Birth. And then both Gavin and I have production companies where we work on other things. I don't have anything else birth related. Do you, Gav? I don't know.
No, but on the extra material we have, we
Yeah.
produce another series of films called Birth Stories. So if you go to faceofbirth.com, and I don't know, Elliot, whether you have these other titles on your platform, but yeah, there's elongated stories from each of the women, from 9 of the women in the film, where we go into a more in-depth story about their experience. And, you know, that goes from women who had home births to cesarean to elective cesarean, and they
And
all talk
we
about
found
their
was-
experience.
Yeah, I was going to say midwives use that tool a lot. They don't show all of the birth stories perhaps to a birthing mother, but they'll show the one that perhaps they feel the women would resonate with or need to see. So that gets used as a tool like that.
Like a little library of.
Yeah. And then we have a long form interviews called Meet the Experts. But, you know, like Sheila's passed away now. So that Sheila interview is quite special. So there's Michelle O'Donnell, Ina May Gaskin, Robbie Davis-Floyd, like just, you know, they're interesting.
Rhea
The
Dempsey.
giants,
Yeah,
the
they are.
powerhouses.
So those are available at faceofbirth.com or on Vimeo on demand. If you type in Face of Birth on Vimeo demand, you can rent those titles online.
Amazing. I strongly recommend. I'm going to watch those too. I'm going to go find them and watch them myself. And that way I'll have another tool to be able to offer people who are seeking empowering. Thank you again, Kate Gorman and Gavin Banks. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for the work that you've done. And thanks for sharing it with the people who need it most, and also adding it to our little collection on Informed Pregnancy Plus. Go check out faceofbirth.com. And at home, thanks for listening to the Informed Pregnancy Podcast. For more pregnancy and parenting information just like this, visit us online at informedpregnancy.com.